Well, thank you. Thank you, Hay Festival, for inviting my wife Jane and me and my brother Larry to be here with you this evening. And Michael, I look forward to having a discussion with you in a few moments. But let me begin by starting off and reassuring all of you that when you see Donald Trump on television and you hear his pronouncements and you read his comments, please understand that on virtually every major issue, the vast majority of the American people do not agree with President Trump. So I want you to go home and rest easier tonight with that knowledge. I also want to say, and it's appropriate given President Trump's recent trip to Europe, that unlike the president, I believe, and most Americans believe, in the need for a strong transatlantic continuity and unity. We left Cambridge a few days ago. We spoke in Cambridge, and we stopped off at the U.S. Cemetery outside of Cambridge. And if you look at the row after row after row of graves of young men of 19, 20, 21, and if you remember the barbarity and the horrors of World War II, where some 50 million people died and city after city totally destroyed, we know that the transatlantic alliance and the need for communities to come together to do everything possible to prevent other wars like World War II are a major, major necessity. And we understand that, yes, countries will disagree with each other, will argue with each other, but we must not withdraw into our own worlds. We must not be America first or UK first or France first. We all have our own interests, but we have got to be an international community. And the reason for that is so obvious. The reason for that has everything to do with the tragedy that you experienced recently in Manchester and that we experienced in the United States and France, Germany experienced. And that is, if we're going to be effective among other many global crises, it is imperative that we work together. The United States cannot be safe if we do not share information from the UK, from France, from Germany, from countries all over the world. You cannot be safe. And if we're going to be effective in protecting each of our nations, if we're going to be effective in fighting and solving the problem of international terrorism, USA can't do it alone, you can't do it alone, we have to do it together. Furthermore, if we are going to address the crisis of climate change, we're going to have to do it together. Now, I know that people all over the world are dismayed by the incredibly stupid and counterproductive decision of President Trump. Well, that too, but of President Trump's decision to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement on climate change. When he ran for president, President Trump referred to climate change as a hoax. And what is very, very frightening, and I think gets people in my country extremely nervous, as I think people all over the world, is how can we have a leader of the most powerful nation on earth reject science? You cannot run a government, you cannot make public policy with alternative facts. what a strong majority of the American people understand is that climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already causing devastating problems in my country and all over the world. And the American people also understand that unless, as a planet, working together, you can't solve the problem alone in the UK, China can't solve it, the United States can't solve it. This is a problem, a crisis, which requires international cooperation. And what I will tell you is that Donald Trump, notwithstanding, cities, towns, and states all over the United States will continue to move aggressively to transform our energy systems away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and such sustainable energies as wind, solar, geothermal, and other technologies. Please do not think that because Trump made an absurd decision that the people of the United States are giving up on the fight against climate change. We are not. We are going to be aggressive in that fight. Now, as I come to Europe and to the UK, there are a lot of people who are interested in my views on Mr. Trump. So before I talk about the book, which is ostensibly why I am here, buy the book. All right, we got that out of the way. It's a good book. Now let's talk about Trump. And I should tell you, the book was written before Mr. Trump won the election. Let me just briefly talk about some of the issues and concerns I think that most Americans have. And for a start, I know that most of you know, and I just want to reiterate it, that Donald Trump won the presidency because he won the Electoral College. He got more electoral votes than Secretary Clinton. But I hope all of you know that Trump lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. Furthermore, what is important to understand is that Trump has been in office now for some 4 months, give or take. And there has never been a president of the United States after 4 months in office who was less popular than Donald Trump. So I say that to, again, just suggest to you that the American people are not in agreement with much of what Trump is doing. And let me tell you a little bit about what he is doing. Now, you may or may not be terribly interested in American domestic policies, but obviously for the people of my country, they are of enormous significance. Trump has supported 2 major pieces of legislation since he has become president. In America today, and I know this is hard to explain to the people of the UK or, in fact, the people of Europe, but in the United States, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, 28 million people today have 0 health insurance. And I want you to think for a moment what it means when you get sick, whether you notice a lump on your breast or whether you are dealing with a heart problem or diabetes, what that means when you have no health insurance and you cannot afford to go to the doctor. But notwithstanding that, we have Trump coming into office and supporting a health care bill which will throw 23 million Americans off of health insurance. Can you imagine in the year 2017, in the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people, supporting legislation that throws 23 million people off of health insurance, cuts the major health care legislation proposal for the poor, called Medicaid in America, by $800 billion, raises premiums for older workers, and defunds Planned Parenthood, which is the means by which 2.5 million women in America get their health care. That is his health care proposal. And on top of that, that particular proposal will give $300 billion in tax breaks to the top 2%. But that's not the worst of it. That's the good piece of legislation. Now let me tell you about the really bad piece of legislation. Trump has introduced a budget. Presidents in the United States introduce budgets, and then Congress takes it and goes with it. Trump's budget is, without doubt, the most regressive, destructive budget ever presented in the modern history of the United States of America. And in a nutshell, what it does is it makes massive cuts to programs that working people desperately need in terms of health care, in terms of child care, in terms of education, in terms of environmental protection, in terms of housing, in terms of nutrition. You think about the basic needs of human beings, the need to sustain yourself through nutrition, to have a roof over your head, to have health care, to have education. In every one of those areas, at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, over a 10-year period, Trump's proposal would cut $2.5 trillion from programs that working people and lower-income Americans, that elderly people, that children desperately need. $2.5 trillion in cuts. And surprise, 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 in that very same legislation, Trump provides $2.5 trillion in tax breaks for the top 1%. Now, all of you I know here in the UK are very familiar with Robin Hood. Robin Hood took from the rich and he gave to the poor. What Trump does is take from the poor and give to the very rich. It is the Robin Hood proposal in reverse. Now, what we are doing now in Congress is working with organizations all over our country to make sure that this proposal will never, ever become law. Now, the opposition to Trump is not just his domestic policies, which favor the rich at the expense of working people. There is another area where what Trump is doing is unprecedented for an American president, and that is he has shown an enormous disrespect for democracy, for tolerance, and for traditional American values and institutions. When you have a president of the United States telling his supporters that the mainstream media is all fake news, that you should not believe anything that you read in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, anything you see on television, on CNN, CBS, NBC. What you are doing is having a president of the United States bring grave doubts to the American people about the world in which they are living. How are you supposed to know what's going on if you end up believing that everything you read in the media, everything you see on television is a lie? Well, then who is telling you the truth? Well, I think a congressman from the state of Texas a few months ago gave us the answer that Trump wants to hear. And what that congressman said, and I paraphrase him, he said, look, you can't believe the fake news, i.e. everything that you read, see, or hear. The only person who will tell you the truth is Donald Trump. Nope, not a laughing matter. It is a very serious issue, because if you have people who are turning on the TV and say, it's all a lie, it's all a lie, the only person, one person who will tell us the truth, and that is Donald Trump, that is a very scary and dangerous situation that Donald Trump is fomenting. But it's not just his attack, unprecedented attack, on the integrity of the media. In America, as many of you know, we have a division of governmental responsibilities. We have an executive branch, the president, we have a legislative branch, the Congress, and then we have a judiciary, independent judiciary. Early in his presidency, Trump issued an executive order which was essentially a ban on Muslims visiting the United States. Seemed to me, and it seemed to many others, that it was blatantly unconstitutional. The issue was taken to the courts, and a judge ruled that in America, under our Constitution, thank God, you cannot discriminate against people who come into the country based on religion, and the judge ruled that that is exactly what Trump's executive order did. All right? That's the good news. The bad news is that the president attacked this judge as a so-called judge. Imagine, says Trump, paraphrasing him, a judge ruling on a constitutional issue and disagreeing with me, the president. What kind of country is it when we have an independent judiciary disagreeing with my interpretation of the Constitution? I'm the president, and the president is always right. So it's not just his attacks on media, not just his attacks on the judiciary, which concern many of us in terms of him moving the United States into an authoritarian way. But it's also the fact that we now have a president who lies all of the time. A president who lies all of the time. I mean, every president has lied some of the time, but this president lies almost all of the time. Now, there's another phenomenon going on in the United States that some of you may be aware of, many of you may not be aware of. And that is many Republican governors around the country are working overtime to suppress the vote. That means that despite the fact that the United States has one of the lowest voter turnouts of any major country on earth, we have Republican governors who are working very, very hard to make it difficult for lower-income people, people of color, older people, young people, to participate in the political process. Instead of being automatically registered to vote when you're 18, instead of being able to simply walk into a polling booth and vote, why now you need a government voter ID card. It may be very hard for you to get that voter ID card if you're poor, if you can't go to the place which is issuing those cards, and that's what they are pushing. And then Trump, a few months ago, says to those governors, you know what? He says to America, in the last election, 3 to 5 million people voted illegally. Everybody in the country is saying 3 to 5 million people. So the media goes up to Republican election officials and says, anybody in your state, voted illegal? No, we don't have any problem. Democratic officials? No, we don't have any problem. We have very little voter fraud in America. Trump claimed 3 to 5 million people voted illegal. Why did he do that? He did it as a signal to every Republican governor that he wants them to move aggressively to make it harder for people to vote. So you add all of that stuff up together, the attacks on the media, the attacks on the judiciary, the effort to make it harder for people to vote, and what concerns many of us, and we are going to mount and are mounting a major counteroffensive here, is that he is moving our country in an authoritarian direction. And not unrelated to that, we have the rather strange situation, and this gets Americans to be scratching their head, is that Mr. Trump, for some reason, seems to be very, very fond of Vladimir Putin. And that's hard for us to understand why the President of the United States would be so enamored with a leader who has severely repressed democracy in his own country, who has spent, who has spent the last number of years actively trying to destabilize democracy in country after country, including, of course, the United States of America in the 2016 election, and who is trying to weaken the transatlantic alliance. Why does President Trump have such a fascination with Vladimir Putin? And the American people are really trying to figure this one out, but it goes beyond Putin. The American people are wondering why President Trump has such kind words, such affection for President Duterte of the Philippines, who is seriously undermining civil rights and liberties in his own country, and why the President of the United States seems to have such affection for the Saudi royal family, a family which claims hereditary power in Saudi Arabia, a family which treats women as third-class citizens. So the American people are saying Trump seems to have difficulty relating to the leaders of democratic countries, but appears to be very, very fond of countries that have autocratic leaders. So you add all of that stuff up, and in America, we worry very, very much about the drift toward authoritarianism. And I do want you to know that as a people, we will not have that take place. As a nation, we have struggled for too long to expand democratic rights, to allow a president, Donald Trump, or anyone else to move the United States away from our democratic traditions and our democratic values. Now, a lot of people ask me, how did Trump win the presidential election? And the answer is kind of complicated, and there are a number of factors. Let me focus on one that I think much of the world may not be familiar with. And that is that while during the presidency of Barack Obama, our economy made significant progress. When Obama came into office, the economy was a disaster. We were just in the middle of the Wall Street disaster, mass unemployment, very, very high deficit. And under the 8 years of Barack Obama, we made significant progress in lowering unemployment and in lowering the deficit. But while we were doing that, very sadly, there were tens of millions of Americans who were left behind within the global economy. So yes, overall, we made good progress economically, but a whole lot of people, often working class white people, found themselves working longer hours for lower wages, found themselves unable to afford health insurance, found themselves unable to send their kids to college, found themselves worse off economically than they had been 20 or 30 years before. And what Trump did, which was very smart politically, what he said is, hey, the Democratic Party has forgotten about you. I know that you're working 2 or 3 jobs. I know that the factories in your town have gone to Mexico or have gone to China. I know that you can't afford to send your kids to college. I know that. And I'm going to be a different type of Republican. I'm going to stand with the working class of America. And it was actually a very powerful statement. And if you've seen any of his ads, very strong ads. It turned out that Donald Trump was lying about what he intended to do. But that message was an extremely strong and effective message. And what I say all of the time in the United States is it is not so much that Donald Trump won the election, which he did, but it is more that the Democratic Party lost the election. And by that I mean the Democratic Party over the years forgot about and ignored those people who were working longer hours for lower wages. Forgot about the half of older workers in America who approach retirement age with nothing or virtually nothing in the bank. Forgot about the single mom making $30,000 a year who cannot afford $10,000 a year for childcare for her baby. Forgot about the college kids who leave college $70,000, $80,000 in debt. And what Trump essentially did is very intelligently is talk to those people and say, I will stand with you. Now, one of the reasons I am running all over the United States of America is to fundamentally rebuild the Democratic Party and try to make it a very, very different party than it has been over the last 40 years. Because when people look at American politics, they say, well, how did Trump win the presidency? That's a good question. And I tried to, just a moment ago, to give you maybe an answer to that. But it's not just the presidency. The Republicans today control the U.S. House, they control the U.S. Senate, they control almost two-thirds of the governor's chairs all over America. In the last 9 years, the Democratic Party has lost almost 1,000 legislative seats in state capitals all over America. So right now, the political issue for this moment is to create a new Democratic Party, a party which opens its doors to working people, to young people, a party which is a grassroots party where decisions are made from the bottom on up, not from the top on down, a party which ceases to depend on Wall Street and the drug companies and billionaires for their financial support. Democratic Party has finally got to decide which side is it on, and in my view, it must be on the side of working people. It must be the party prepared to take on the billionaire class and corporate interests. And when we talk about what's going on in America, it is important to face some hard truths, truths that you're not going to see every day on television or read in the papers. And the most fundamental truth that I know about the United States and increasingly about other countries around the world is that in America, we are moving toward an oligarchic form of society. And what that means is a nation in which a small number of billionaires control not only the economy, but the political life of the nation. In America today, if you can believe it, the top 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. In America today, the 20 wealthiest people own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. One family, the Walton family, owns more wealth than the bottom 42% of the American people. What is not widely known is that in the United States, our people work the longest hours of almost any people in the industrialized world. We are not like Europe, where everybody gets August off. Ain't America. Not America. In America, there are millions of jobs that are being offered today, this year, that have zero vacation time. Most jobs, or many jobs in America, provide zero paid medical or sick leave. In other words, if you get sick, you're not entitled to take the day off. Family or medical leave does not exist for most workers. But the issue of income and wealth inequality is not just wealth, it is also income, in the sense that despite the fact that the American people are working 2 or 3 jobs, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, 52% of all new income goes to the top 1%. But it is not just an American issue. Globally today, top 1% of people on this earth own more wealth than the bottom 99%. Globally today, and this is just beyond belief, and it is an issue that we have got to deal with, the 8 wealthiest people in the world now own more wealth than the bottom half of the planet, 3.4 billion people. The issue of oligarchy, the issue of the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality is an issue that we cannot, as an American or as a part of the earth, continue to ignore. It must be dealt with. And in America today, that issue is not just an economic issue. It becomes a political issue, because as a result of a disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court decided that corporations and the wealthiest people in America could spend unlimited sums of money on the political process. And that means that there are families like the Koch brothers, family worth some $80 billion, an extreme right-wing family, now spending hundreds of millions of dollars every single year to help elect politicians who represent the wealthy and the powerful. So when we talk about a grotesque level of income and wealth inequality, not just economics, in America it is politics as well. It is billionaires subverting American democracy and buying elections. And that is why one of our highest priorities is to overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision and move toward public funding of elections. Now, what the book is about, I hope if you read it, I think you will enjoy it. What it talks about is a campaign that started off as kind of a joke in the eyes of the media. I was a candidate from a tiny state, one of the smallest states in this country, had very little national name recognition. We had almost no money at all, and we decided to take on the entire Democratic establishment. And what occurred as we got out on the campaign trail is we found that the American people were desperate to hear some truths about their lives that were not talked about by mainstream politicians. They wanted to know why, despite incredible income in this incredible increase in worker productivity as a result of automation and robotics, why they were working longer hours for lower wages. They wanted to know why in America we were the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. They wanted to know why in America we paid by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. They wanted to know why in America low-income kids and working-class kids were unable to afford to go to college because of the high cost of college, and why we could not join many other countries around the world in making public colleges and universities tuition-free. They wanted to know why we were not more aggressive in addressing the crisis of climate change or rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. And what we found, this campaign that started with a handful of people and almost no money, is that we struck a nerve with people all over the country. We went to meetings. And at the beginning, we had 300 or 500 people coming out. And then we'd have 5,000 people coming out. And then we had 25,000 people coming out. And then suddenly money started flowing, and not from big money interests, but in an unprecedented way in American history, working class people, low-income people, young people started contributing. And we ended up raising literally hundreds of millions of dollars with an average contribution of $27. And then what ended up happening is by the end of the campaign, we won 22 states. We won about 46% of the popular vote. But what was most impressive to me, and most, I think, something that made me feel very, very positive, is that in every single state that we contested, in 50 states in America, without exception, we won the youth vote, people under 40, often by landslide proportions. And what that meant, and that message was clear to everybody in America, is that the future of America is, in fact, through a progressive agenda, that we are prepared to think big. And then at the end of the campaign, it turned out that the Democratic Party was prepared to accept some 80 to 90% of the ideas that we campaigned on. And literally, as we speak right now, there are Democratic members of the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House, who are offering as legislation the exact ideas that we campaigned on. Just a few weeks ago, we offered legislation that doubles the minimum wage in America to $15 an hour. Legislation has been offered, that will guarantee 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave. Legislation has been offered that will make public colleges and universities tuition-free. Legislation has been offered which will transform our energy system from fossil fuel to sustainable energy and create millions of jobs. Legislation has been offered that will rebuild our crumbling infrastructure and create up to 13 million jobs as we rebuild our roads and bridges and water systems. So yes, we lost the election, we lost the primary, but the ideas that we fought on are now the ideas that America is discussing, and that in itself is a significant victory. So, with that, let me turn to Michael, and let's get your questions. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say that there is a whole other tent full of people watching this on a screen as well. So, hello
other tent. Yeah. How are you?
I'm very struck by how many parallels there are between what you've described, particularly about the campaign, your recent campaign, and what obviously we're in the final throes of here. You talked about your campaign being seen as a bit of a joke to begin with, and the odds being against you, and we've seen something similar happening here. Have you been paying much attention to what's going on? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are that I appreciate and respect very much what Corbyn is trying to do in a couple of respects. First of all, and if there's anybody in the world who knows how difficult it is, I do, in that he's trying to transform the Labour Party and meeting a lot of opposition as he attempts to do that. And what he has understood is that for a political party to be successful, you have to involve ordinary people. You can't have a handful of politicians on top, no matter how well-intentioned they may be, to have a successful political party. People themselves, ordinary working people, middle class, young people, have got to jump in to the process and understand the importance of what happens at the national level. And I think he has tried to rebuild the Labour Party in that sense, and I think that's exactly the right thing to do. It's exactly the same approach that we're taking in trying to rebuild the Democratic Party. And the second area where I have a lot of respect for Corbyn is he is tackling an issue that a lot of people in the UK and in the United States feel uncomfortable about. Now, if I were to talk to you and tell you that in the United States over the last 30 or 40 years, we have come a reasonably good distance in overcoming racism, okay? Do we have racism in the United States? Absolutely. But if we were here 40 years ago and I were to tell you that in 2008 we would elect an African-American president, you would not have believed me. Most people would not have. So the United States has moved quite a lot in terms of civil rights and ending, or at least combating, racism. And people say, well, that's great. We're all supportive. And if I were to tell you that in the United States we have made good progress in combating sexism, that there are far more women in elected office today than there were 20 or 30 years ago, far more women holding important corporate positions, women in the military, women generals, people would say, that's really good, you're combating sexism. If I were to tell you that a few years ago, a conservative Supreme Court said that our gay brothers and sisters have the right to be married in every state in the United States, you would say, wow, that's real progress. And it is. So in a lot of social areas, whether it's civil rights, whether it is gay rights, whether it is women's rights in other areas, the United States of America has made significant progress, and we have a right to be proud of that. And similar type progress is being made in countries around the world. But one area, and Corbyn talks about this area, and I talk about this area, where we are not making progress, in fact, where we are losing ground, is the economic struggle to provide a decent life for working families in the UK or in the United States of America. We are not making progress, we're losing ground. And I know for 100 different reasons that it is difficult for people to be thinking about this issue. Yes, we want to, create equality for African Americans, for women, for gays, and so forth. That's kind of easy in a sense. But it is harder to say, you know what? We are in the midst of a major, major struggle against a small number of multi-billionaires who have more wealth and power than anyone in this room could imagine. They determine what kind of manufacturing facilities stay in the United States or move to Mexico. Their financial institutions can wreak havoc on large and small countries all over the world because of the incredible wealth and power of Wall Street and large banks. But it is high time, and I applaud Corbyn for doing this, that we started asking a fundamental question, and that is whether in the UK, whether in the United States, whether in this planet, it is appropriate for so few to have so much wealth and so much power at the same time as millions and millions of people around this planet are working so hard just to keep their heads above water. This issue must be dealt with.
Can I ask you something about rights?
Yes.
I've spent quite a bit of time in America over the last sort of 14, 15 years. And one of the things that I've noticed about the general conversation in America when it comes to something like healthcare is the idea that, well, it's not a right for people to have healthcare. The marked difference that I found there is that here in Britain, because we've had the National Health Service for 70 years next year, that how that has affected us culturally. I feel like there are very few people in this country who would now say that it's not a right to have healthcare, So can you talk a little bit about that, and then generally more about what are our rights?
See, that issue is a very, very important issue. And at the end of the day, that is what the political divide is about. What the right wing says is, hey, you're on your own. You're 70 years of age, you have no health insurance, you've just been diagnosed with cancer. Well, I'm sorry about that, but tough luck, you're on your own. You're a bright young person who wants to become an engineer, you're great in math, but you don't have enough money to go to college. Hey, tough luck, you should have had different parents. you are a little tiny baby and your mom is out at work and can't afford decent quality child care for you, I'm sorry, it's a tough world. You know, it's a dog-eat-dog world, isn't it? We're all in it for ourselves, and I got to beat you down in order for my family to do well. And I don't have to worry about anybody else except me and my family. That is the right-wing ideology. But there is another belief that says we are all human beings. We all have the same needs. We are all in it together. And when your family hurts, my family hurts. And you need me to be there for you, and I need you to be there for me. And that in a democratic, civilized society, that is what it is about. That when my kids get sick, you're going to help me make sure they get the health care they need. Now, in 1948, and you should be extraordinarily proud of this, what this country did and said to the whole world is that health care is a right, not a privilege. And what you did here impacted not only this country, but countries all over the world. And one of the top items on my agenda and the agenda of many, many other Americans is to join every other major industrialized country on earth and move to what we call a Medicare for all single-payer program, which will guarantee health care to all people, as you do in the UK, as the French do, as the Germans do, as the Scandinavians do. We're going to do that. But, you know, because you asked that question, Michael, I'm reminded of something that didn't get a whole lot of attention in the United States, and that is, I think in the year 1944, a year before Roosevelt died, he gave a speech. I think it was what we call a State of the Union speech. I think that was the speech. Never got a whole lot of attention. And what he said, essentially, is that in America we have, as part of our Constitution, a Bill of Rights, 10 amendments that were passed when the country was first formed. And those amendments guarantee you the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, your right to practice your religion without government interference, et cetera, et cetera. And what Roosevelt said in 1944, and is as true today as it was then, he said, we need an economic Bill of Rights. Okay, it's great, you can feel free to speak, practice your religion. But what about the right to have a decent job? What about the right to have health care? What about the right to have education? What about the right to have decent housing? Is that a human right? I think it is. And the world that we have got to fight for, and we can achieve, because we are an extremely wealthy world, if we use that wealth in a rational way, is, yeah, we can create a world where people have those rights. And think what that means when you wake up in the morning and you don't have to worry whether you can go to a doctor or not. You don't have to worry whether your kids are going to get a good education or not. You don't have to worry whether the water you drink is clean or whether it is filthy. That is, in my view, our goal, to make sure that every human being on this planet has basic rights to live their lives in a way that at least provides a minimal standard of living for all. And we can achieve that.
Now, I would like to sit here and ask you questions all day, but in the spirit of democracy, I feel like we should let this audience loose on you. So if we could bring the house lights up, and if we could have a show of hands, there's a gentleman. Great, okay, thank you.
Hello, thank you for the wonderful talk. My question is basically, in the next election in the US, will you be running?
Well, the answer is it's much too early to talk about those things. Right now, I and many of my colleagues in the Congress and around the country are working very hard in two directions. Number one, to defeat the Trump agenda, and number two, to fight for a progressive agenda which works for working families. So we got an election that doesn't happen for 3.5 years. That is a long, long time. So if you forgive me, I will not respond to that question at this time.
Yes, the lady over there.
Thank you very much. Bearing in mind you have midterms coming up next
Yes.
year, and the Republicans are making strong efforts with their gerrymandering.
Yes.
Realistically, how many seats do you think that the Democrats can get back?
The three concerns, as the woman indicated, in 2018, there's what we call midterms. Those are when every House seat and a third of the Senate come up, and that's the year that the president is not up for election. The three problems we have in terms of elections in America, number one, as I mentioned, as a result of Citizens United, billionaires can buy elections. And many, many hundreds of millions of dollars will be spent by a handful of families to make sure Republicans retain control of the House and the Senate. Second issue, as I also mentioned, is so-called voter suppression, where Republicans are working very hard to make sure that people of color and poor people cannot participate in the political process. The third area is what you touched on. I don't know if everybody is familiar with what we call gerrymandering. And what that is we have 435 members of the House and 435 separate House districts. And districts are created based on the census in terms of what the population of a state is. A larger state like California will have 50 legislative districts. Small state like mine will have one. The whole state is one district. And in the larger states, the party in control can create the kind of districts they want. And some of them, right now, Republicans have gone very, very far in creating totally weird districts to make sure that they win the seats. And it is a very serious problem that we are working on. But the bottom line is that despite all of that, I cannot predict to you how many seats the Democrats will win. It turns out that in the Senate, most of the people up for re-election are incumbent Democrats. It makes our life a little bit more difficult. But I think, everything being equal, I think the revulsion against Trump's agenda is such that if we can bring out the vote, last midterm election, all of 37% of the people voted. We have got to raise that substantially. If we can do that, I think we can do very, very well and gain a lot of seats.
I'd love to get a question from someone up at the back there. So I can see some hands up. We'll just wait for a microphone to get up there, and then we'll come over to you in a second. But it would be great. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, and it's been a wonderful evening, actually, with the two speeches, one after the other. But what has interested me is that amongst the things that people require to live a decent life must include housing. And we have a terrible problem here with housing. It's substandard for many people, and even worse, it's insecure and very expensive. And I think I'm right in saying that you have a problem stemming from the 2008 crash because of all the mortgages that went wrong. And I just wonder if you could say a word or two about that.
Well, thank you for raising that issue because it is not talked about enough. But you're absolutely right. I'm not familiar with the UK. But I will tell you that in the United States, we have a massive crisis in terms of affordable housing. When I was mayor of the city of Burlington, we did some very positive things. But as a nation, you have millions of people, if you can believe this, who are spending 40, 50% or more of their income just to put a roof over their heads. And the federal government has done a very poor job in providing the resources that we need in order to build more affordable housing or more low-income housing. We have a homelessness problem because we don't have low-income housing for low-income workers. So when we talk about infrastructure in America, And we are talking now about $1 trillion proposal over the next 10 years, which will go into roads and bridges and water systems. It also must go into affordable housing. We need to build units all over this country. I was in Bristol earlier today, and I understand that there, and I suspect other places in the UK, you have a gentrification issue. Wealthier people moving in, driving up the cost of housing. Very serious problem in the United States as well. So what we do need to do is build a massive amount of affordable housing. It is an issue that does not get the attention that it deserves. Thank you for raising it tonight.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been such an amazing evening. It's just regarding when your speech was interrupted in Seattle by the Black Lives Matter movement, how does that feel? Because you're always on the edge of politics, and when we've got Corbyn, he's been a rebel throughout his life in politics. How does it feel to suddenly be the target of those rebellions and those matters? Because obviously you must appreciate where they come from, but
Sure.
It's very difficult when you're standing up for also what they talk about. So.
Well, I do understand where they are coming from, and I'll tell you where they are coming from. We have, and again, I don't know how widely known this is around the world, but in America today, disgracefully, we have more people in jail than any other country on earth. China is 4 times our size. We have more people in jail than China does. 2.2 million people. We're spending $80 billion a year. And what is also going on is that in many inner cities around America, largely African-American communities, people are treated with incredible disrespect. And I know you have seen, and we have certainly seen it in America, videos of children, of innocent people being shot and killed and manhandled and beaten because of very, very poor police practices. And that's what Black Lives Matter brought to the fore, and I appreciate that. I don't like to be demonstrated against and so forth and so on, but I understood where they are coming from. And as part of what we are trying to do right now is to fight for real criminal justice reform, including police reform. One of the problems in America is that we have police departments which use lethal force much too frequently. And the goal of a good police department is to do, and it's very difficult being a police officer, and everyone should appreciate that, and they have to make decisions on the second. But the goal of police departments should be to do everything they can to address the crisis in front of them, the struggles, the fights, the mental instability, the threats, in a way that is non-lethal. And too often in America, that has not been the case. So I certainly understand where Black Lives Matter is coming from. We have worked with them, and we're going to fight for real criminal justice reform.
Can we get a microphone right up to the very back as well? Because let's have that question. But next, can we get one right at the back there? Thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much for a wonderful evening. It's been so inspirational. What I'd like to know is, what can the Democrats do to mitigate the possible loss of the Supreme Court within the next few years?
Of the what?
Of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Because this is obviously a real big concern with President Trump now. And while the grassroots movement is distinctly important, how can the Democrats mitigate the loss of that?
You are absolutely right. As all of you know, a new Supreme Court justice was nominated and approved by the Congress against my vote. There will be another right-wing vote on the Supreme Court. Right now, the Republicans have a 5-4, the conservatives have a 5-4 majority, and we're very worried about the decisions that Supreme Court will be making. I mentioned to you about Citizens United being bad. They want to make it even worse. They want to allow billionaires simply to give money to candidates. There will be more attacks on women's right to choose, et cetera, et cetera. I think all that we can do right now is to rally the American people about the issues that the Supreme Court is addressing. Supreme Court does not live on the planet Mars. And for example, to everybody's surprise, a few years ago, they voted to make gay marriage legal in every state in this country. They respond to what the people are saying and expressing. And our job is to rally the American people around issue after issue and to tell the Supreme Court how far removed they are from where the American people are when they make a bad decision.
Thank you.
Maybe one or two more questions.
Yeah. We have a clock that has disappeared.
It's gone.
So I now no longer know how
You're in
long.
overtime.
So we're here all
Yeah.
night. We're here all night. Let's get a question from the lady right at the back there.
Senator Sanders, thank you so much for your talk, and I'm so honoured to be able to talk to you. Sorry. I was just wondering, because I'm so disillusioned by everything that's going on in the States at the moment, and I was really looking forward to applying to so many of the amazing education institutions you have for university, and hearing you talk has restored my faith in that. I wanted to ask you what all of us in this room can do to actually bring about a change. It could be so overwhelming to hear all these issues, but as someone who is the young generation who will hopefully bring about change, what can I do?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And I myself do not get involved in British politics. He said that. Look, I would be fooling you and you would not believe me if I told you that we don't have serious problems all over the world. We have terrible problems. And one option is to simply throw your hands up and retreat from these crises. That is not a good option. I think the option is to rethink our roles in a democratic society. What the system basically tells people every single day is, you are powerless. We got the money, we got the power. Hey, maybe every few years you got the right to vote. That's about it. Think small, not big. There's nothing you can do. That's what they want you to think. But the truth is, when people stand up together, we've seen it all over the world. We've seen it in my country through the civil rights movement, through the gay rights movement, through the women's movement. When people come together and make demands, we can win. They got the money, we have the people. So think about the role that you can play, not alone, but with your friends and your neighbors and your co-workers. Rethink your role in a democratic society. Make it a much bigger and more aggressive role. Now, I can't tell you, and I don't know what your particular interests are, but I can tell you that whatever they are, there are a whole lot of people who share those interests. Reach out to them, work with them, stand up and fight back, and you will be surprised at the kinds of changes we can bring about. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hey, Michael, great job.
Fantastic. You get a flower, sir.
Oh, I got a flower here.
You get a flower.
Thank you.
Thank you.